Where we left off previously was we had chopped this poor cube into fourths. So this is the crate reference that we are using, and we are going to go ahead and start creating these little perpendicular extrusions out of the box. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go into my side view, and the first thing, right now the side view and the front view look very similar, but this is the side view. I'm going to go begin by making some modifications to my grid because I'm going to be relying on my grid to help me make this as symmetrical as possible. So because I've already built this box before, I know that I want to go into the display, go into the grid section, and I want to change the grid. I want the length, width, and grid lines to stay the same, so 12 and 5, but subdivisions, type in 80, apply and close. Now I know there's like a ton of divisions now, but it's going to be really helpful. What I found is that each one of these little extrusions is about 2 units, 2 of these little tiny units wide. And since I chopped this in half, this middle unit only needs to be, this middle section only needs to be 1 unit. So I originally said I didn't want to use the edge loop tool, but to begin establishing this, what is eventually going to be this, I don't even know what to call it, partition? I will call it a partition. What's eventually going to be this partition on the mesh, we're going to need an edge loop to start with. Now, yes, the edge loop is not going to be perfect. It's going to be more perfect toward the middle than it is on this side because all of these edges are lined up the way they should be, but it's not going to be ideal. But it gives us something to start with. So I'm going to go into object mode. I'm going to shift right click and go into insert edge loop, reset tools because it doesn't matter if it's centered anymore. And I'm just gonna, oops, go back there. I'm just gonna go in and drag this in about a unit. Again, because it's so close to this straight side, it almost seems like it's straight, but if you'll notice, it's crooked. So what I need to do is, I'm going to turn off the grid in the perspective view because that's going to drive me nuts. So after I'm done creating this edge loop, notice that if I look at this from the top view, the edge at the top is perfectly straight. That's because the edges on this end of the crate and that end of the crate on the top are not bent or in any way altered. So it's not going to be a situation where these edges are slightly skewed or slightly twisted. Whereas on the side, because this plane right here is tilted inward, it's going to cause some distortion on the edge on the side. And that's what we are here to fix. So I'm going to grab the first edge on this side and I'm going to double click all the way to the bottom. I'm going to shift right click and delete that edge. Then I'm going to go into my side view, right click and go to vertice. And you'll notice the vertices are still there for the edge that's on top. Okay? I'm going to grab those vertices and go to 4 in my non-shaded view, so on wireframe. And I'm going to just hold down my X, which is going to snap to grid, and make sure that all these vertices are aligned with, oops, make sure I didn't just mess that up. There we go. Make sure all these vertices are snapping and aligning with that first grid. Now, technically you could have eyeballed all of this, trying to make this as centered as possible, just from eyeballing. But if you're anything like me, it can kind of bother you to a certain degree when things aren't quite, when you've got a really symmetrical object that just isn't symmetric. So that's why I'm bothering to go through all of this. All right, so I've lined up these top vertices and these bottom vertices. They all line up to a single unit, like we can see on the side view here. And we're going to use a really cool tool that is just going to chop straight down the side. So I'm going to go into my object mode. I'm going to shift right click, oops, shift right click, and instead of going to edge loop, I'm going to go to a tool called multi-cut. Now you'll notice immediately multi-cut keeps wanting to reach for all these different intersecting vertices. The multi-cut tool is like a pair of scissors. And you're going to draw a line, and anywhere you draw the line and press enter, it's just going to create a line based on what you've drawn. So I'm going to hover this tool over the top edge, and I'm going to click it, and I'm going to hold it down. See how this vertice slides? I'm going to slide it all the way to the right so that it's, and let go so that it's aligned with the vertice at the top. And then I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to do the same thing, where I'm going to click on this line and align it with that edge and press enter. That should create a straight line. It might not have. It could still be slightly distorted. Let's zoom in and see. Yeah, it looks like there might still be some slight distortion, but fortunately for us, we can just go in and press X and snap to grid. But this is going to give us a more accurate outcome than what we would have gotten with the Insert Edge Loop tool. Okay, so there's our first partition. I'm going to walk back a little bit and go into Display, Grid, and I'm going to reset my settings back to the way they were, because there was just too many grid lines for me to figure out where I want to place my partition next. So my side partition, not my middle, but my side, I'm going to go ahead and line up with this grid point right here. Okay? So I'm going to go back into object mode, shift right click, oh shoot. There we go. Shift right click, insert edge loop tool, and I'm going to just do my best to kind of line it up with the grid right there. Okay? When I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and grab this mouse, click the top, click the bottom, double click, click, shift, double click, so that I'm only grabbing the part that's on the side, not the top or the bottom. And I'm going to press delete. Now, I made a mistake. I made a mistake on purpose as sort of a teaching moment. You cannot just delete an edge loop. If I shift right click and I go to, I mean, it looks like I've deleted it, but you'll notice that when I hover, it looks like there's two lines there. And if I right click and go to my vertice mode, we see that there's these vestiges of vertices that were left over. So I'm going to undo. It is really important that when you have your line selected that you don't just press delete. Instead, you want to shift, right click, and delete the edge. Okay? After that's done, go press F8. I'm going to shift, right click, and go back to that multi-cut tool. And I'm going to slide it over to that vertice, go down here and slide it again, and press enter. When we go to the side view, you can see that there's still a little distortion, but it's not nearly what it was. I'm going to right click, grab this vertice, and I'm going to snap it to grid. And do it again over here. And then I'm going to go to my windows, or my display. I'm going to go back to my grid, and I'm going to reactivate all those subdivisions. I'm going to turn it back on to 80, apply and close. All right, so over here it's only 1 unit because we're going to mirror this geometry, which will make it 2 units once it's mirrored. Over here there's not going to be any mirroring, so we're going to go ahead and insert another edge loop. I'm going to press F8. I'm going to shift right click, insert edge loop, and I'm going to sort of kind of try to align it there with the top. Now honestly this is not, this is barely distorted, and the reason that is because this edge and this edge are not distorted. If I create it on this side, notice that distortion, but there's no distortion between these two lines. So that means we don't have to delete anything. Instead, we just grab the vertices, because they're all perfectly aligned, and grab the move tool and just snap to grid. Oh, I snapped to vertice. Grid is, in fact, the X hotkey. So I'll snap this over, and they are already ready and aligned. Press F8, and it puts us back in object mode. Again, I hate when the faces act up, so I'm going to press spacebar, mesh display, harden edge. That's better. And I'm going to go ahead and save. So Last time I chopped up my mesh. This time I'm laid out partitions. I don't know how to spell partitions. I'll just call layout sections. You can make fun of me for that later. All right. So now that we have this set up and ready to go, we are going to go ahead and extrude those pieces. So I'm going to grab the right click and click these faces. And actually, I'm going to save that for the next tutorial. So in our next tutorial, we're going to go ahead and start pulling out those faces.